something I want to talk about is the PSE bows we just got in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we just got a pretty solid shipment of bows from our friend Cade over at PSE. So I'm super pumped about them. I got the new Stealth Mach 1.
Yeah, no, yours is sick.
It's
awesome.
It's a carbon bow. I got the Kuiu camo on it.
It's cool.
It is pretty cool. And then all of their accessories from there. We also got some bow fishing rigs. So I'm pretty pumped about those as well and getting to try those out.
Yeah.
We just got them all put together. And then we also got, AJ just got the Brute.
Yep, the Brute.
Which is like...
first bow.
Yeah, I would say that it's like their base model start-out package. Ryan, you wanted mine. I've been shooting PSE my whole life. I had a Vendetta XS, which was like all in. I have a lot of money wrapped up in that bow, and it is
Well, it shoots
sweet.
great.
Yes, it does.
So I'm kind of new to the whole game. I had a bow when I was really young. I think I bought one for my birthday when I was like 10.
Just a recurve?
No, it was a compound bow. Sucked. It was. I bought it. I bought it myself with my birthday money.
$40.
I think it was like 120 or something like that.
Okay.
Well, at least yeah.
Yeah. So
Bigger birthdays than we had, huh, AJ? 120 bucks rolling deep.
We don't live by Peapod.
Must be nice.
So I never really got into it that much, and then laid it to rest for many, many years. And then you gave me your bow. So now I'm really getting into understanding the mechanics and the physics of it, and at what distance, what should I do? At what height should what should I do? Or all that sort of stuff. And while I'm shooting, I have no idea whether this is the correct way to shoot or not, but it's been working for me. As long...
I stick out my tongue.
Yeah. I can... Obviously, I know the right form to shoot the bow. I can set myself up in a consistent, I have consistent form when I'm shooting the bow. And then something I have been doing, and I've noticed it's helped me, when I'm shooting at anything probably over 15 yards, if I'm holding steady on the target, I tend to wobble around and shake, just as anyone would.
Wobble with it.
Yeah. I'm just slowly dipping up and over and side to side over the target.
Yeah, it's like if you're zoomed in with a scope, let's say, with a gun, and you're zoomed in really far on something like 400 yards away, and you're trying to hold it still, you'll learn even the littlest movement of tininess is so drastic at the farther the distance
and
goes.
Now,
and with a bow, it's...
Yeah, and now you're stretched all out, and you're holding your arm way out here with weight on the end. Now, thankfully, that bow isn't that heavy, but still, it's weight. So what I've learned to do is go a little bit higher than my target and then come down through the target very, very slowly. And it's almost as if I can draw a much straighter line coming slowly straight down. And once that pin crosses over my target, that's when I squeeze the trigger.
Okay.
And I'm not yanking it. I'm not pulling it. It's all very fluent. And AJ's seen it. I was hitting dimes the other day.
I tried it. It did work for me.
Yeah.
I have no idea whether that's how you're supposed to do it, but it's been working.
The checklist that I go through is, obviously, you have your sight. So this is the checklist I always use when shooting archery, is you have your sight, and you need to look through that first. So I pull back, I find my anchor point, which is consistently the same every time. And then I bring the I bring the string right to the tip of my nose, and I look straight through the peep with the string directly on my nose. So those are the two things that very first things I look for. My arm is bent in just a smidge. And then what I'll do is I'll take that peep and I'll line it up with my sight. So the sight has different pins on it, but I make sure those circles are lined up perfectly. So when I'm looking through it, it's perfect. The circles are the circles. At that point, looking through the double circles together, I find my target. So, and especially depending on how the sun is and everything else, that can be difficult. But I find my exact target that I'm looking for. Then once I find it and it's in those two circles, I'll figure out, I already know the distance because I already took that calculation in as I was pulling back the bow. And then based on the distance, I'll pick whichever pin it is and I'll slowly move it there. And then, it's the slow movement of the pin getting to the spot. And I'll have it there. And as soon as it touches that spot, I squeeze the trigger. And that's how it works for me. I've never done the gradual come down through it, but that's the checklist that I have that works for me. But, where things get complicated and where that little trick has come in handy is, let's say deer's coming in, right? Because when we're shooting in the backyard, it's so nice to be able to go slow and do this and do that.
Right.
But when you've got a deer in front of you, you've got movement, you've got variables, you've got when you have to pull back based on when they might not be looking.
Mm-hmm.
You've got all these new variables that you don't get when you're out in the yard.
And then you pull back and have to wait 4 minutes for
and that's where I'm headed with this, is that pullback is like, let's say you pull it back, now you've got about 45 seconds to a minute and a half till you're able to actually shoot, right? Because just the variables of now the deer turned facing you, so you don't have a shot at the vitals or whatever it might be. Well, at that point, if you're getting a little tired, now luckily the bow that I have, the new Mach 1 from PSE, which is just insane. I mean, the let off is so much that I can hold that thing back forever. I mean, once you get past the break point, it lets off so much that I can be really comfortable for a while.
It's wild.
But that being said, your arm's still just standing. You stand for a while in one spot, you get tired. You know what I mean? So once you're kind of tired and a little, then, using a technique like that as a backup will help when you're a little bit tired or, stressed or whatever it might be. That can help you be a little bit more still, because moving makes it easier to be still. Like drawing a straight line is easier than holding it in one spot or, whatever it might be. So I can see where that would be helpful in certain instances.
What's your stance? Like, you're completely new to it.
Yeah.
So
how do you like the Brute, the
It's
PSE
fun.
Brute?
It's really, really fun. I'm still learning my own checklist. So it's just been a lot of shooting, 10 arrows a day, figuring things out. Overall, it's a lot of fun. I'm surprised. Well, not surprised, but it would have been nice to have gotten into it a lot younger.
Yeah.
But having a high quality bow work the way it would for a novice like me, I'm very satisfied.
Yeah,
it's great.
You feel like with that bow, and that package runs someone normally about $600 without the arrows.
Right.
But that package for $600, you never shooting a bow in your life, and then us teaching you, you're hitting really well pretty quick.
Yeah.
I mean, for a beginner package, the PSE Brute is pretty solid.
It's definitely, even if you're not into hunting, it's definitely a great little hobby to have, because you can almost, as long as you're doing it safe, you could probably do that in most American backyards.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It is. Don't be shooting into the back of your neighbor's house, but
No.
there's definitely ways you could do it, because it's not like shooting a gun. You don't have to be out in the middle of nowhere at the gun range. Just set it up right and do it. And
Right.
I would recommend it to a lot of people. They're just looking for something to do.
Yeah, I would say so too. A lesson that AJ got to learn today, two of them actually. One, we were seeing how far our arrows were penetrating at 20 yards when we were shooting, and I was like, look, how far does it go into our blackout target? When it hits it, it's a block target. You can use broadheads in and everything like that, and it's like there's this much arrow sticking out. I said, now hold that arrow and try and slam it into the target with your hand and try and put it in that deep. And he tried it, and obviously you can't, what I mean? Because
it goes in like 3 inches.
and that gives you the perspective
Pretty much,
on
yeah.
how much power that arrow has when it hits. Now imagine, because he was asking, he said, because like I said, AJ's brand into it. He said, is 25 yards, is that are you good to kill a deer at 25 yards? And I said, yeah, and that's why I showed him this. I said, now imagine, that's with just a field tip.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine a hypodermic broadhead, that's precision made to just cut through things. I go, you could see why a razor blade sharpened with a hypodermic needle at the end could cut through an entire body.
Yeah.
Because imagine the force it would have at 25 yards when you yourself can't even push an arrow as hard as that would go.
Imagine a drill bit
Yeah.
with a hypodermic needle on the end, and it's just spinning like you wouldn't believe. Just right through that. So
Yeah, it is a drill. Good
Hot.
yeah, hot.
Going through.
Which
Yeah.
reminds me, speaking of drill bits, it's insanely easy to get into key locks.
Oh, yeah. So Jeffrey, from traveling from Oklahoma, we had gotten wind that we didn't think Jeffrey had cleaned his cleaned his gun. So I'm like, we got to get it out of there. Oh, it's one of the case. We have so many gun cases, and his had his locks on it. I'm like, we got to get these locks off, and he's not coming today, and I want to get this done now, so let's do this. So Ryan, go ahead. How'd you get these are just standard locks.
Master locks.
Yeah, they're master locks, TSA approved for flying and everything. And So you come to me and say, we got to get these guns out of here. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I got some tools here. So I get out the Sawzall and I'm like trying my best to cut through this thing. And I have the metal cutting blade on it and everything. Finally get through it. But the way the gun case is set up is really good. So you can't get the lock off unless the lock is unlocked. So we're like sitting there trying to wiggle this thing out, get it just right. I was like, you know what? Let me just try something. So I just go get a giant drill bit, look at the keyhole, jam that sucker in there, and let it crank. And I'm just drilling straight through that lock. And within seconds, it came unlocked. It took nothing. Any lock you see, just take a drill bit to it. You'll be in no time.
Yep.
Yeah, right down the center of it.
Robbery's going up 10% now.
Yeah.
Another thing that I want to talk about is a lesson that AJ got to learn today. So we were talking about this when he was shooting. One of the things that he asked me, and you can get that perception too, is when you're taking a step back and you're like 25 yards from the target and you're shooting your bow. It's like, is this deadly at this distance? If you never shot archery before, that's like a fair question.
It slows down the further you go back, but you wonder if it's going to be able to penetrate through or not.
Right. Especially as you get farther, the arrow is going to slow down, and you just have this different perception. It's not a gun, so it's like a lot of variables are there. And AJ's bow is set at 60 pounds. I think yours is set at 60 pounds, and mine's 70, which is way more than enough. You can effectively hunt with a 35, 40-pound bow if you know what you're doing. Ted Nugent gets mad at you if it's over 50. You know what I mean? So when he talks about it. So one of the things that I did was I said, okay, AJ, let's shoot from 25 yards. So he shoots and we see the impact. We use a black target. It's one of the foam black targets that you can use for when you are shooting a broadhead. You can shoot a broadhead into them. So, but it's a smaller foam target. It's only about 18 by 18, I think is what it is, square. Yeah. And I said, okay, go ahead and shoot from 25 yards. He shoots, and we see that the arrow goes clean through, like most of the way where the fletchings are now at the target. So the arrow, most of the arrow went all the way through. I said, okay, now hold that target still and pull that arrow out, and I want you as hard as you can to slam that arrow in with force, and see how deep you can penetrate the arrow. And how far did you get it in?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to shank it, and it was 5 inches maybe.
Right. So it's a good lesson to teach a kid is take an arrow and slam it into it and see how far into the target they can kind of push it. And it gives you an idea of the force that the arrow has when hitting the target, that it goes in so far.
Right.
And I said, now imagine a hypodermic needle at the end of it, because the broadheads that I shoot Rage 2 blade, and they've got mechanicals that have a hypodermic tip, and that thing's made to cut through stuff. I mean, that's hypodermic needles are what they take your blood with. Shout out Jenna. But
Yeah.
when you shoot an arrow like that, it goes right through the deer, like hot through the. I mean, it's like a drill almost, just boom right through.
Yep.
Yeah. So that another lesson that we talked about was something that happened to me on my first deer, and figuring out and accounting for different distances for deer is important when deer hunting, and understanding the variables when hunting, how it works when you see deer at different distances, and how to account for that with your arrow. So a mistake I made when I was young, I practiced with my bow. I got good with it. I was hitting dimes at 10 yards, and I was hitting quarters at 20 yards, and I was hitting silver dollars at 30 yards. I was very happy with where I was at. And I went out, I had a PSE bow then as well, and I went into a tree stand for my first time, and I sat up there, and it didn't even occur to me that I just changed every variable possible. And I'm sitting up there, deer come in, I get buck fever, I get the adrenaline dump, I get all that, and I'm able to calm myself down because it's doe. I had killed a bunch of deer already with a rifle, so I'm like, okay, just get your act together, relax. I cool myself down. I get an opportunity to draw back on the deer. Now, I'm elevated 20 feet in a stand. It was a ladder stand that we had out there for years. I think it's still there. And I draw back, and the deer are about 10 yards from me. So if I was at the base of the ladder, they're 10 yards from me. So I draw back, and I put my first pin, which is my 10-yard pin, right on the spot I want to shoot the deer. I go through my breathing. I go through everything I'm supposed to do. Everything's perfect. I slowly pull the release and I shoot. And when I pulled that trigger, I was like, I'm golden. I buried it. Call me, I don't know, Robin Hood. I smoked it. This thing's dead as a doornail. And within a split second, all my dreams were crushed because I saw the arrow go right over the deer's back. And I'm like, what? I did it perfect. Why did this happen to me? And that day, I got to learn all about how the mystical flight of the arrow and how that works and how you have to take these variables into account, especially being elevated and the flight of the arrow. So a lot of people believe that an arrow flight is a straight line. But in all reality, when the arrow comes off the bow, it starts by immediately going upward. A bullet does too. A bullet doesn't take a flat path to where it's going. It starts by going up and then going down. So it's more of an arch. So you see the arch here, and that's the flight of the arrow. Well, what you have to account for is when you elevate yourself or you change your elevation, is you have to account for the gravity that's being put on the arrow. So here, I'll go back actually 1 second. So if you're looking at this arc, this is the arc that takes place if you are flat to the ground, okay? So if you are flat to the ground and that's the arc that takes place, imagine if you elevate it and you point downwards, how that might impact that arc, because this is the arc it takes when the gravity is consistent because it's shooting parallel to the ground. So when little Kyle was up here and he was in an elevated tree stand and the deer was down. Oh, man, I'm so good at drawing deer, too.
Woof.
Everyone. Yeah, beautiful. When I used my 10-yard pin, the arrow still, no matter what, even while pointing down, started in its upward trajectory. And then it never came back down. Now, what I saw in my sight was I thought it would go straight through the deer like that. But because the arrow started by going high, the gravity impact was not as great as if it was flat to the ground and being pulled to the ground the whole time. Because I was shooting with the gravity by shooting down, the arrow came off the rest high, like it always does, but it never got pulled back down in its arch to the 10-yard mark that it would normally be, because I was elevated and I was working with the gravity. So when I put that 10-yard pin on and I didn't account for the fact that I was 20 feet in the air shooting straight down, that was the difference in missing the deer. So that I went back and I explained it to my dad and Pete, and of course they're like, well, yeah,
of course.
I'm like, hey, what variables are in play here? Because I just missed a deer. My dad's like, you missed? You know, and they were pretty stunned. So what they did was Pete explained what I just explained to you, probably more elegantly. But he said, yeah, when you're elevated and you're shooting down at a target, if you're using the same 10-yard pin, your arrow is going to hit way high because you're not accounting for that drop. Because the gravity pull on the arrow is different. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you need to know to shoot low. If you elevate yourself and you're shooting straight down at a target, you have to account for that because of the impact on the arrow. So what they did was they moved my pin up. So my 10-yard pin got moved way higher, which means I'm aiming way lower, okay?
Right.
When I'm pulling it back. So by aiming lower and moving my pin upward, I was able to account for that. So we took a target out there, put it roughly where the deer were, and I was pulling the trigger with the higher pin, and I was hitting the target properly. And then I ended up killing a deer out of that stand. We packed everything in. I went back out for the evening hunt, got a deer that night. So if you talk about a TV show episode wrapped up in a lesson right there for us, that was the day to... Yeah, where were you, Ryan? Where were you, AJ? But that was... Ryan wasn't thought of. And
I was like 4.
You're like, where were you? And you're like, I'm sorry. But that was an interesting lesson for me, is like, going out, and the whole point of this story is obviously to teach a cool lesson about how the flight of the arrow is impacted by gravity. But in addition to that is going out and practicing in the area that you're going to be in.
Right.
If you have private land, especially, you're way blessed where you can take the tree. If you use a climber, if you use a ladder stand, whatever it is, take a target out there with you and get your pin zeroed in for, the different shooting lanes that you have to practice for these situations, because it's hard enough, all the variables, like a deer comes in, how far away are you, deer? What angle are you at? When can I pull back so you're not looking at me? When can I make the right move? When can I draw back? Okay, now I've got to line up these circles. Okay, now I've got to use the correct pin for what it is. Oh, God, he moved 10 yards farther. Okay, what does that mean? All these variables that you have going on, you better at least know for the different distances at the different heights what your bow is going to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of geometry and math.
Yeah.
That needs to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
In archery.
8th grade math's coming in handy now.
The discipline, though, of you can practice out in your yard all you want with a target that is completely parallel with you, and that's good because it gives you the understanding of, finding those circles each and every time.
The fundamentals.
Finding the target, the fundamentals, how you release. You
Right.
know. But it's a whole nother ball game once you get out there, and then you got the pressure on.
Yeah, and just the other thing, if you don't have a rangefinder, make sure you know your distances, because like you just said, if you don't know your distances if you don't know your distances, you're going to screw up, especially if you don't have a rangefinder. So a good thing to do is, if you know where you're going to hunt, go out there and pace out different trees or stumps or rocks and say, well, I know that rock is 10 yards away. I know that tree over there is 20 yards away. Somewhere in the middle is 15.
And if you're elevated, what does that mean?
Right. Yeah.
What does that mean?